The sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow over the lush garden where rows of white chairs were neatly arranged. The air buzzed with excitement as friends and family gathered to celebrate what everyone believed would be the most memorable day of Emma's life. The venue was nothing short of magical. Towering trees swayed gently in the breeze, their leaves rustling like soft whispers. Strings of fairy lights hung delicately above, shimmering faintly even though it was still daytime. Fresh flowers adorned every corner, filling the space with sweet fragrances that mingled perfectly with the light chatter of guests. Emma stood at the altar, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her bouquet. She wore a stunning white gown that seemed to float around her like clouds. Her veil cascaded down her back, catching the sunlight in a way that made her look almost ethereal. Despite her nerves, she couldn't help but feel proud of how beautiful everything had turned out. Every detail, from the floral arrangements to the carefully curated playlist playing softly in the background, had been planned meticulously by Emma herself. This was her dream wedding after all, and she wanted it to be perfect. On the other side of the aisle stood Daniel, her fiancé. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, exuding confidence as he waited for the ceremony to begin. His smile was warm, and he occasionally glanced toward Emma, trying to reassure her with his calm demeanor. They had been together for 3 years, and while their relationship wasn't without its ups and downs, they had always managed to find common ground. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, a lifetime commitment shared between two people who loved each other deeply. At least that's what everyone thought. As the string quartet began playing the familiar notes of the bridal march, the crowd rose to their feet. All eyes turned toward Emma, who took a deep breath before taking her first step down the aisle. Her father walked beside her, his arm linked with hers, offering silent support. For a moment, everything felt exactly as it should. The music swelled, birds chirped in the distance, and the scent of roses lingered in the air. It was picture perfect, or so it seemed. But then, just as Emma reached the halfway point of the aisle, something unexpected happened. A loud bark echoed through the garden, startling everyone. Heads whipped around, searching for the source of the noise. Before anyone could react, a scruffy golden retriever came bounding into view. With muddy paws and a wagging tail, the dog dashed past the rows of chairs, sending guests scrambling to avoid being knocked over. Some laughed nervously, thinking it might be part of the entertainment. Others gasped in surprise, unsure of what to do. The dog didn't stop there. Instead, it continued running straight toward the altar, weaving effortlessly between the stunned onlookers. Its fur was matted and dirty, evidence of some recent adventure, but its energy was undeniable. As it approached, Emma froze mid-step. Her grip on the bouquet tightened and her heart skipped a beat. Something about the dog felt oddly familiar, though she couldn't quite place why. Time seemed to slow down as the dog skidded to a halt right in front of her, panting heavily and looking up at her with wide, soulful eyes. For a few seconds, no one moved or spoke. The music faded into the background, replaced by an eerie silence. Emma stared down at the dog, her mind racing. Then, suddenly, recognition dawned on her face. Tears welled up in her eyes as memories flooded back, memories she hadn't allowed herself to revisit in years. The dog wasn't just any stray. It was Max, her childhood companion. The same loyal pup who had once followed her everywhere, waiting patiently outside her school gate and curling up at the foot of her bed every night. The same dog she had tearfully left behind when she moved away for college. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. How could this be? Max had disappeared years ago, shortly before she left home. She had spent months searching for him, putting up posters and calling local shelters, but eventually she had to accept that he was gone. Or so she thought. Now here he was, standing in front of her on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Emma's knees buckled slightly, and she instinctively knelt down, dropping her bouquet onto the grass. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Max, pulling him close despite the mud staining her pristine gown. The dog responded by licking her face enthusiastically, his tail wagging furiously. Around them, The guests watched in stunned silence, unsure of whether to laugh, cry, or cheer. Some snapped photos, capturing the surreal moment on their phones, while others exchanged confused glances. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly, breaking the spell. Emma," he said, his voice tinged with irritation. "Can we maybe continue the ceremony now?" But Emma barely heard him. She was lost in the flood of emotions overwhelming her. Joy, disbelief, guilt, and nostalgia all swirling together. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the wedding, not the guests, not even Daniel. All she cared about was the furry bundle of love in her arms, reminding her of a simpler time in her life. Little did she know, this unexpected reunion would set off a chain of events that would change everything, for better or worse. Emma's embrace with Max felt like it lasted an eternity, though in reality it was only a few moments. As she knelt on the grass, tears streaming down her face, she couldn't help but notice how much older he looked. His once glossy golden coat was now dull and matted, streaked with dirt and leaves from whatever adventures he'd been on recently. But his eyes, those big, expressive eyes, were exactly the same. They sparkled with the same loyalty and affection that had made him such a beloved part of her childhood. The guests began to murmur among themselves, their initial shock giving way to curiosity. Some whispered about whether this was some kind of prank or staged moment. Others speculated about where the dog had come from and why he had chosen this particular day to make an appearance. Meanwhile, Emma remained oblivious to the growing buzz around her. Her focus was entirely on Max, who seemed just as thrilled to see her as she was to see him. He wagged his tail so hard that his entire body shook, and he kept nudging her hand with his nose, clearly seeking more attention. Just as Emma started to wonder how Max had found her after all these years, another figure appeared in the distance. A man came rushing through the gate, slightly out of breath and looking flustered. His clothes were casual, a plain t-shirt and jeans, and his dark hair was tousled, as if he'd been running for a while. In one hand he held a leash which dangled uselessly at his side. When he spotted the dog sitting contentedly next to Emma, relief washed over his face. "Max," he called out, his voice tinged with both frustration and concern. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The man approached cautiously, glancing nervously at the crowd before stopping a few feet away from Emma. He offered an apologetic smile, clearly aware of the disruption his dog had caused. "I'm so sorry," he said, addressing no one in particular but directing his words mostly toward Emma. "He must have slipped his leash during our walk. I didn't mean for him to crash your, special day." Emma finally tore her gaze away from Max long enough to look up at the newcomer. For a brief second she studied his face, trying to place whether she knew him. There was something vaguely familiar about him, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Still holding Max close, she managed to choke out a question. "Is this your dog?" Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. The man nodded, crouching down to Max's level. "Yeah, he's mine, or at least he has been for the past few years. I adopted him after he showed up near my house. Poor guy looked like he'd been wandering around for weeks. No collar, no tags, nothing." He paused, studying Emma's tear-streaked face. "Wait, do you know him?" Emma swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She nodded slowly, unable to speak at first. Finally, she whispered, "His name is Max. He used to belong to me. Well, my family, really. He disappeared about 5 years ago. I thought I'd never see him again." The man's expression softened, and he let out a low whistle. "Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea. He just showed up one day looking lost and hungry. I took him in and we've been inseparable ever since. I never imagined he'd lead me here, to you." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as people pieced together what was happening. Emma's mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, visibly moved by the reunion. Even Daniel, who had been standing awkwardly at the altar, seemed momentarily taken aback by the emotional scene unfolding before him. Curiosity got the better of Emma, and she turned her attention back to the man. How did you find him? Where do you live? She asked, her questions tumbling out rapidly. Each answer felt like a missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't realized she'd been trying to solve. Well, the man began, scratching the back of his neck. Like I said, he wandered onto my property. I live just outside your hometown, about 10 miles from where you grew up, I think. I assumed someone would come looking for him eventually, but when no one did, I decided to keep him. He's been happy there ever since. Emma's heart sank at the mention of her hometown. Leaving had been one of the hardest decisions she'd ever made. Life there had been complicated, filled with strained relationships and unspoken expectations. Moving away had given her the freedom to start fresh, but it had also meant leaving behind pieces of her past, including Max. Hearing that he had ended up so close to home stirred up feelings she had worked hard to bury. So, she pressed, gently, you've had him for 5 years? What's his life been like? Does he still love chasing tennis balls? Does he sleep on the couch even though he knows he's not supposed to? The questions poured out of her, each one revealing how deeply she cared about the dog who had once been her constant companion. The man chuckled softly, clearly amused by her enthusiasm. Oh, he's definitely still a troublemaker. Loves playing fetch, stealing socks, and sneaking onto furniture whenever I'm not looking. Honestly, he's been the best company I could ask for, but... He hesitated, glancing at Max before continuing. I can tell he hasn't forgotten you. Sometimes late at night he'll sit by the door and stare outside like he's waiting for someone. Now I understand why. Emma's chest tightened at those words. Guilt washed over her as she realized how much she had missed, not just Max, but the simpler joys of life she had left behind. She thought about all the memories they had shared, lazy summer afternoons spent lounging under the shade of the old oak tree, rainy days curled up on the couch watching movies, and countless walks through the woods behind her parents' house. It was almost too much to bear. As the weight of the moment settled over her, Emma became acutely aware of the eyes watching her. The guests, Daniel, even her own family, all of them were waiting to see what she would do next. Part of her wanted to retreat into the sanctuary of the present, to return to the carefully planned script of the wedding. But another part, the part that had spent years longing for closure, knew she couldn't ignore the significance of this unexpected reunion. For now, however, all she could do was hold Max close, her fingers buried in his fur as she tried to process everything. The man, whose name she still didn't know, remained crouched beside her, offering quiet reassurance. Though she barely knew him, there was something comforting about his presence. Maybe it was the way he spoke about Max, or maybe it was simply the fact that he had cared for the dog she loved so dearly. Whatever it was, Emma couldn't deny that this stranger had unknowingly brought her face to face with a chapter of her life she had long tried to forget. As the murmurs of the crowd faded into the background, Emma realized that this moment wasn't just about Max. It was about choices, regrets, and the paths we take in life. And as she sat there surrounded by the chaos of a disrupted wedding, she knew one thing for certain: her story was far from over. Emma's mind was a whirlwind of emotions as she sat on the grass, still holding Max tightly. The man who had been caring for him, his name was Ryan, as he'd introduced himself moments earlier, remained crouched beside her, patiently answering her questions and sharing stories about Max's life over the past 5 years. Each detail painted a vivid picture of the dog's adventures since they'd been apart. But beneath the surface-level conversation, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this reunion wasn't just about Max. It was also forcing her to confront parts of herself she had buried long ago. Ryan spoke warmly about how Max had adapted to his new home. He loves running through the fields near my house, Ryan explained, smiling fondly. Sometimes I'll let him off leash and he'll sprint like crazy, chasing butterflies or sniffing every tree in sight. It's funny. He always comes back eventually, though, like he knows where he belongs. Emma nodded silently, her heart aching at the thought of Max roaming free without her. She imagined him bounding across open fields, his tail wagging furiously as the wind ruffled his fur. It was a beautiful image, but it also made her feel distant from the dog she once knew so intimately. Had Max missed her during those years? Or had he found happiness with Ryan, forgetting the bond they once shared? Her thoughts were interrupted when Ryan hesitated before continuing. "I don't mean to pry," he said carefully, "but why did you leave him behind, if you don't mind me asking?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Emma froze, unsure of how to respond. The truth was complicated, tangled up in memories she had spent years trying to suppress. She glanced around at the crowd of wedding guests, many of whom were now whispering among themselves or checking their phones, clearly impatient for the ceremony to resume. But Emma didn't care about them anymore. Not right now. This moment felt too raw, too real to be brushed aside. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak. Her voice was soft at first, barely above a whisper, but as the words tumbled out, they gained strength. "It wasn't easy," she admitted, her gaze dropping to Max's muddy paws. "My family, we weren't close. Things got really tense between us after high school. I wanted to move away, to start fresh somewhere else, but leaving meant giving up a lot of things, including Max." Her voice cracked slightly and she paused to compose herself. Ryan listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "That must have been hard," he said gently. "Leaving your family and your dog isn't something anyone does lightly." Emma shook her head, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. "No, it wasn't. And honestly, I thought I could come back someday. Visit, maybe even bring Max with me when I settled down somewhere permanently. But life, well, it doesn't always work out the way you plan." She glanced toward the altar, where Daniel stood awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His presence suddenly felt jarring, like a reminder of how far she had drifted from the person she used to be. Ryan followed her gaze, sensing the unspoken tension. "This wedding, it's supposed to be your big day, isn't it?" he asked cautiously. "I can tell you're torn. Do you want to talk about it?" Emma hesitated, unsure of whether she should open up to someone she barely knew, but there was something about Ryan's calm demeanor that put her at ease. He didn't judge her or rush her. Instead, he simply waited, giving her space to decide, for herself. Finally, she nodded. "I guess I've been running from my past for a long time," she confessed. "When I left home, I told myself I was doing it for the right reasons, to chase my dreams, to build a better future. But looking back, I think I was running away more than anything. From my parents, from the guilt of leaving Max, even from myself." Ryan nodded sympathetically. "Sometimes we need distance to figure things out," he said. "But running only works for so long. Eventually, the things we leave behind catch up with us. Maybe today is proof of that." Emma smiled faintly, marveling at how insightful Ryan seemed despite barely knowing her. She wondered what his story was, how he had ended up adopting Max, of all dogs. Was it fate or just coincidence? Either way, she was grateful for his kindness. Without him, Max might never have found his way back to her. As the two of them talked, the atmosphere around them shifted. Some guests had begun to wander off, growing restless as the delay dragged on. Others lingered nearby, watching curiously, but keeping their distance. Emma's mother approached cautiously, her eyes red from crying. "Sweetheart," she said softly, kneeling beside Emma. "Are you okay?" Emma looked up at her, surprised by the concern in her mother's voice. They hadn't spoken much in recent years, their relationship strained by unresolved conflicts and unspoken grievances. But in that moment, seeing her mother's face filled with worry, Emma felt a flicker of warmth she hadn't expected. I'm not sure," she admitted honestly. "But I think I need some time to think." Her mother nodded, reaching out to pat her hand. "Take all the time you need," she said. "We're here for you, no matter what." The gesture caught Emma off guard, stirring emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. For so long she had convinced herself that her family didn't understand her, that they wouldn't support her choices. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe the distance between them wasn't as insurmountable as she had believed. Meanwhile, Daniel grew increasingly agitated. He had tried to interject earlier, urging Emma to return to the altar, but his attempts had fallen flat. Now, standing alone at the front of the venue, he looked frustrated and embarrassed. Several times he glanced at his watch or checked his phone, clearly uncomfortable with the prolonged disruption. One of the bridesmaids approached him, whispering something in an attempt to calm him down, but Daniel shook his head, his jaw tightening. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. "It's just a dog. Can't she deal with this later?" His words carried across the garden, sharp and dismissive. Emma heard them, and they stung more than she cared to admit. To Daniel, Max might have been just a dog, but to her he represented something far deeper. He was a connection to her past, a symbol of unconditional love, and a reminder of the values she had neglected in pursuit of success. Ryan noticed the change in Emma's expression and leaned closer. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Emma shook her head, her resolve hardening. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not okay. Because if Daniel can't see how important this is, if he can't understand why Max matters to me, then maybe he doesn't know me as well as I thought." Ryan didn't respond immediately, letting her words sink in. Then after a moment, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You deserve someone who gets you," he said simply. "Someone who sees the things that matter most to you and respects them." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over her. For the first time in years, she realized she had been living according to expectations, her own, her family's, society's, without stopping to consider what truly made her happy. Today, surrounded by chaos and uncertainty, she finally understood that happiness wasn't about perfection. It was about authenticity, about embracing the messy, unpredictable parts of life that made it worth living. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden, Emma knew she had a decision to make. She could ignore the turmoil inside her and continue with the wedding, pretending everything was fine. Or she could listen to her heart and take a leap of faith, even if it meant walking away from the plans she had worked so hard to create. For now, though, she stayed where she was, holding Max close and savoring the bittersweet joy of reconnecting with a piece of her past. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. This moment would change her forever. Emma sat on the grass, her mind racing as she tried to process everything that had unfolded. Max rested his head on her lap, his warm presence grounding her in a way nothing else could. Ryan remained nearby, offering quiet support without pushing her to make any decisions. The weight of the moment was undeniable. This wasn't just about a dog bursting into her wedding. It was about confronting choices she had avoided for years. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues over the garden, Emma felt the walls she had built around herself start to crumble. Daniel's frustration became impossible to ignore. He paced back and forth near the altar, occasionally glancing at his watch or muttering under his breath. At one point, he approached Emma, his face etched with irritation. "Can we please focus on what's important here?" he said, his tone clipped. "This is supposed to be our day, not some impromptu reunion with a stray dog." Emma looked up at him, her heart sinking. His words weren't cruel, but they stung nonetheless. To Daniel, this interruption was an inconvenience, a minor hiccup in an otherwise meticulously planned event. But to Emma, it was so much more. Max represented a part of her life she had left behind, a reminder of who she used to be before ambition and expectations took over. How could Daniel not see that? "I'm sorry," she said softly, though her voice carried a hint of resolve. "But this isn't something I can just brush aside. Max, he means a lot to me, more than you realize." Daniel sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I get it, okay? He's your dog and you're happy to see him. That's great. But we've got hundreds of people waiting for us to say our vows. Can't this wait until after the ceremony?" Emma shook her head slowly. "No, it can't," she replied, her voice firmer now, Because if you don't understand why this matters, if you can't see how important Max is to me, then maybe we're not as ready for this as I thought." The crowd fell silent, every eye turning toward them. Some guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others leaned forward, eager to hear what would happen next. Emma's mother stepped closer, her expression a mix of concern and pride. Even Ryan seemed taken aback by her sudden clarity, though he nodded encouragingly when she glanced his way. Daniel stared at her, disbelief written all over his face. "You're seriously going to let this ruin everything?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "All because of a dog?" "It's not just about the dog," Emma shot back, standing up now. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "It's about realizing that I've been living my life according to someone else's script. I've been chasing success, trying to prove myself to everyone around me. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of what really matters." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces watching her. These were people she cared about, friends and family who had gathered to celebrate her future. Yet as she scanned the crowd, she realized that none of them truly understood her. Not the way Max did. Not the way Ryan seemed to, even after such a short conversation. "Max reminded me of who I used to be," she continued, her gaze returning to Daniel. "He reminded me of the values I once held dear: loyalty, simplicity, love without conditions. And honestly, I don't think you ever saw that side of me. You never asked about my childhood or why I moved away from home. You only saw the version of me I wanted you to see, the polished, successful architect who had it all together." Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, he looked around at the guests, clearly embarrassed by the spectacle unfolding before them. For a moment, Emma felt guilty about airing their private struggles in public. But then she remembered how many times she had silenced her own feelings to keep the peace, to avoid rocking the boat. This time, she wouldn't back down. Ryan cleared his throat gently, breaking the tension. "Emma," he said, stepping forward, "you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. If this is what you need to do, then do it. Trust your instincts." Izeu. Words gave her courage. She turned to face Daniel fully, her heart pounding in her chest. "I care about you, Daniel," she said earnestly, "and I'll always be grateful for the time we spent together. But I can't marry you, not today, maybe not ever. Because I need to figure out who I am again, without distractions, without compromises, just me." For a long moment, Daniel didn't respond. He simply stood there, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he said, his voice quieter now. "Do what you need to do. But don't expect me to stick around while you sort through whatever this is." Emma swallowed hard, fighting back tears. She knew his words were meant to hurt, but they also confirmed what she had suspected deep down. Their relationship had been built on shaky ground. They loved each other, yes, but not in a way that allowed either of them to grow. It was time to let go, for both their sakes. As Daniel walked away, heading toward the parking lot without looking back, Emma felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The pressure of perfection lifted, leaving behind a quiet calm. She turned to Ryan, who offered her a small, reassuring smile. "That must have been tough," he said. "But you did the right thing for yourself." Emma nodded, reaching down to pet Max, who wagged his tail happily. "Yeah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think I finally did." The guests began to disperse, some murmuring sympathetically, others shaking their heads in confusion. Emma's mother approached her, wrapping her arms around her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Whatever happens next, we'll figure it out together." With those words, Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she wasn't running anymore. She was standing still, surrounded by the people and the memories that mattered most. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She was ready to face it, one step at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma stood amidst the remnants of what was supposed to be her wedding day. The garden, once bustling with laughter and anticipation, now felt eerily quiet. Chairs sat empty, flowers wilted slightly in their vases, and the string quartet had long since packed up their instruments. Yet despite the chaos that had unfolded, Emma felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from anything, or anyone. She was simply present, standing in the moment and letting it wash over her. Max stayed, close by her side, his tail wagging lazily as if he understood the gravity of what had just happened. Every so often he would nuzzle her hand or lean against her leg, offering silent comfort. Ryan lingered nearby too, respecting her space but staying within reach in case she needed him. His presence was calming, like a steady anchor in the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Though they barely knew each other, there was an unspoken understanding between them, one forged through shared moments and mutual love for Max. Emma's mother remained at her side as well, holding her hand tightly. "You did the right thing," she said again, her voice soft but firm. "It takes courage to walk away from something when you know it isn't right." Emma nodded, though tears still pricked at the corners of her eyes. "I just wish it hadn't taken me this long to realize it," she admitted. "All those years, I spent so much time trying to prove myself to everyone else, to Daniel, to my friends, even to you and Dad. But I never stopped to ask myself what I really wanted." Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "We all make mistakes, sweetheart. What matters is learning from them and finding the strength to start over." The words resonated deeply with Emma. She glanced around at the scattered remnants of her wedding, the table settings, the decorations, the carefully crafted details she had poured her heart into planning. It was hard not to feel a pang of regret for the dreams that wouldn't come true today. But as she looked down at Max, whose muddy paws had stained her gown beyond repair, she realized something important. Life rarely went according to plan. And sometimes the most unexpected detours led to the greatest discoveries. Ryan cleared his throat softly, breaking the silence. "So, what happens next?" he asked, his tone light but curious. "Do you have somewhere you need to be? Or are you okay staying here for a bit?" Emma smiled faintly, appreciating his tactfulness. "Honestly, I don't know," she admitted. "But I think I'd like to take Max home, for tonight at least, just to spend some time with him and figure things out." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Of course. He's your dog, after all. I'll help however I can, whether that means driving you back to my place to grab his things or just making sure he's settled in wherever you decide to go." Emma felt a rush of gratitude toward him. In such a short amount of time, Ryan had shown more kindness and understanding than many people in her life ever had. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "I don't know how I would have handled this without you." He shrugged modestly, though a hint of pride flickered in his eyes. "Hey, I'm just glad Max found his way back to you. It's like fate or something." The word fate hung in the air, lingering between them. Emma couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to it. After all, the odds of Max showing up on her wedding day of all days seemed impossibly slim. Was it coincidence? Or was it a sign that she needed to confront the past before moving forward? With Max trotting happily beside her, Emma walked slowly toward the parking lot, where her car was parked. Her mother followed closely, carrying Emma's discarded bouquet and chatting quietly about practical matters, like calling the caterers to cancel dinner and rescheduling the venue deposit. Despite the weight of the situation, Emma found herself smiling at her mother's determination to handle the logistics. Some things never changed, she thought wryly. When they reached the car, Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "If you're okay with it, I'd like to stay in touch," he said. "Not just because of Max, but because, well, I feel like we have a lot to talk about." Emma looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. She hadn't expected to form any kind of connection with him today, yet here they were, bonded by a scruffy golden retriever and a whirlwind of emotions. "I'd like that," she replied, her smile widening. "Maybe we can grab coffee sometime, once everything settles down." Ryan grinned, clearly relieved. Coffee sounds perfect. As he handed her Max's leash, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a small jolt of warmth through her. It was a fleeting moment, but it left her feeling hopeful in a way she hadn't anticipated. Maybe starting over didn't mean doing it alone. That night, back at her apartment, Emma curled up on the couch with Max sprawled across her lap. The room smelled faintly of mud and grass, a reminder of the day's events, but she didn't mind. Instead, she ran her fingers through his fur, marveling at how familiar it felt. Memories flooded back. Childhood summers spent playing fetch, rainy afternoons watching movies together, and countless walks through the woods. Max hadn't forgotten her, and she realized now that she hadn't truly forgotten him either. He had always been a part of her, tucked away in the recesses of her heart. As she flipped through old photo albums later that evening, Emma allowed herself to reflect on everything that had happened. Leaving her hometown, abandoning Max, pursuing a career that consumed her life. It had all been part of her journey. But today marked a new beginning. A chance to reconnect with the values and relationships that mattered most. By the time she drifted off to sleep, Max snoring softly beside her, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life wasn't about avoiding mistakes or chasing perfection. It was about embracing the messy, unpredictable moments that made it beautiful. And as she closed her eyes, one thought lingered in her mind. Sometimes, the best decisions are the ones that scare us the most.